Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Boland and Charles Lachlan.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Lachlan, Senior Analyst at Localogy, joined by my colleague Mike Boland. Mike, how are you?
Hey, Charlie, doing well.
Great. So what's on your mind this week, Mike?
So CES is in full swing. I think by the time this episode airs, it will have just wrapped. But we're looking at all the stuff happening there. And of course, the show is more about just like gadgetry. I happen to be sort of an AV and photography nerd, so I'm paying attention to a lot of stuff. But there's usually sort of a limited list of announcements in what is really a hardware-centric show that have anything to do with like the Localogy verse. So local media and advertising and commerce. But there are always a few. So I'm watching those, and one I'm looking at today is something that Google announced at the show, where it sort of merged electric vehicles, EVs, with a topic that is one of the most inherently local topics out there, which is mapping, and where Google already has a firm flag planted, obviously. So what it's doing specifically is bringing together its charging station mapping data, which it already had in Google Maps, and it continues to build that up with actual data from the car. And that second piece is sort of the key piece. And I'll get into that in a second. So basically the result is, as a driver, you get proactive suggestions on like charging up. And drivers can like plan in real time. So for example, you get into the car, type a destination into Google Maps, and in addition to, the routing you normally get, it now can also tell you, if you're in an EV, the battery status and the level you'll have when you arrive at that destination, which of course is an estimate, and then any charging opportunities along your route. And of course, what this does is it addresses the dreaded range anxiety problem and having to constantly sort of mentally reconcile the car's current battery status, which it tells you, but then a separate app or source of information on the location of charging stations along your route. It's sort of a cognitive load issue and just, juggling those things, which no one should have to do when they're driving. So basically, Google's innovation here is sort of bringing it all into one place, into one app. And it's able to do this through again, all the mapping data it has on charging infrastructure. And it's really building, as a side note, quite a taxonomy on not only location, but also charging station speed and what tier of station it is, and its upkeep and real-time status for things like closures, which apparently are common at any given time. 40% of them are like non-operational. So anyway, it's got all that data already. It's building that up for Google Maps. And then the second piece, which again is where the magic happens, is tapping into the car data itself. And it's able to do that through Android Auto. So Android Auto is sort of like Apple CarPlay, if you're familiar with that, in that you plug in your phone and then there's a direct integration with the car's media and navigation and other functions. And in this case, it taps into the battery diagnostics. So that's essentially how it's able to pull this off. And it's going to roll this out in the coming months, Google tells us, starting with the Ford Mustang Mach-E and F-150 Lightning, which are two, top-selling EVs. And then from there, it's going to announce additional automaker integrations. And that list could grow quickly given sort of robust automaker EV rollouts. And though demand has really been slower than anticipated, we're hearing a lot about that. It's still a high growth area. And I think Google has an opportunity here to sort of own that in-car experience in a growing category. Sort of like it's the analogy I like to sort of look at here is that Google in the last maybe 3 or 4 years has really established itself sort of quietly as the best OS in Google TV. For TVs. It's now the top choice and is integrated in, the LED and OLED flagships from like Sony and other top brands. That's sort of what it's doing here, but in the car. So altogether, it's interesting. Google's starting to expand and diversify into these other consumer touch points. And we'll obviously keep watching to see how all of these avenues grow.
That's what jumps right out at me is we're going to have like a two-tiered system of Tesla versus everything else?
Yeah.
Because everything you described is already kind of baked into the Tesla OS, whichever.
Yeah.
I forget who built that. I guess Tesla did, but
Yep.
you know, how much battery will be, left on your car when you arrive at your destination? All those things are there already.
Yep.
But are they there with these existing alternative EVs like the Mustang and the F-150, or is Google filling a void? I guess I'm trying to, what are we going to have, like an Apple Google, like kind of like the app world? Yeah,
that's exactly what I was going to say. Tesla is Apple in this scenario, where it's
that's
vertically integrated.
I'm going with it. Yeah.
It's vertically integrated. It's all its homegrown stuff. It's very elegant. They do have mapping. That all of that's in there. I'm not sure what they're using for their mapping, if they've built it off of Google's mapping API or if it's homegrown. But either way, yeah. In this scenario, Tesla is Apple in that it has its own sort of thing going on. The rest of the world is the rest of the EV world is analogous to the PC world, where you have OEMs, and the analogy there being like PC makers, who then go out and fill their hardware with a third-party operating system, whether that be Chrome OS or a Windows-based operating system, and then all of these sort of third-party solutions. So yeah, that's the best way to look at it.
So is the next step, instead of the app, that it's just Google partners with the OEMs and bakes this into the OS?
So and Google actually, Google has two things. One is what I mentioned, which is Android Auto, which they cars have to kind of roll off the line being compatible with it, much like, again, Apple CarPlay has that compatibility baked in. It's not necessarily in the car, but it's compatible if you want to activate it. Google's sort of, if you step up a tier in terms of its level of integration, has another one that I think it's called Google like Integrated or Google In-Car, something like that, where it is an integrated sort of built into the car as opposed to being an aftermarket solution. So it has two tiers there, but that second one is what you're talking about.
Is there a danger that like other EV players are going to want to be vertically integrated? I mean, there's always talk that Apple's going to do this. They haven't yet, right? But,
Apple builds a car.
But, there's all the luxury brands have their EVs now. What are they going to do?
See, I think that, you're right. I mean, it would be a worry for Google if they were to say, okay, Ford, instead of like outsourcing this to us, is just going to build their own Ford OS. The problem is Ford's
hard to
not
see
good.
that, but yeah.
Yeah, like Ford, Chevy, all these other car makers are just not good at software. They're not good at the UX.
Right.
Same reason why Sony and Samsung, again, the TV analogy, are not building their own like operating system and UX and navigation for their TVs, because they've done that in the past and it was terrible.
Yeah.
And they're just going to go to a best of breed software provider that's very good at those sort of.
That's probably a better plan for them.
Yeah.
What I don't own a Tesla, but I've driven in them quite a bit, and the comment I always make is this thing is an iPad on wheels.
Yeah.
I think of it more of as a device than as a car. And
it gets the over-the-air updates. It's very much a mobile device more than it's a mobile device.
Yeah, and it has that vibe. Everything about it feels like, except it does have wheels and an engine. It goes pretty fast. To me, it feels like driving a very large, fast golf cart. But that's a personal opinion. But yeah. So I've always felt like this is like just another device, and so I imagine the manufacturers, if they're not thinking of them in that sense, maybe they should be. And if this move by Google suggests, it's kind of pushing in that direction of, these are devices with an operating system that just happen to be cars. So,
and they know what they're good at and what they're not good at. They're going to continue doing the parts that they're good at, which is to install the engine, put on the wheels, all the assembly line work. And they're not software players. So I think that they're going to outsource it and then also lean into it in terms of the marketing. Say, the Ford Mustang Mach-E now with Google Auto. I mean, it's going to be a selling point. It's going to be a feature, not a bug.
Okay, Mike. So I've got something real quick today. It's a little bit of a change of direction. Usually you're the one who talks about AI. I'm not really going to talk about the technical components of AI today, but more about data around AI adoption by small business. And over the last week, I've been seeing a few different studies come out, which I'll get into in a second, not in too much detail. Basically, they're saying, roughly a third to, a little under a half of small businesses are either currently using AI or intend to use AI, start using AI this year in some fashion to run their business. We've talked at length about the various ways AI, different software companies have created AI tools that small businesses can use for a variety of purposes, and we expect that list to grow, of course. And what it struck me as I was looking at this data, one of them is a survey from JP Morgan, another is something that VCTA, a company we cover a lot, just came out with. The VCTA study, I think, said around 30% of small businesses are already using AI. And I think the JP Morgan study said that 46% of small businesses intend to begin using AI this year. And what all shows me is that 2024, this is not really a prediction, but something for us to keep an eye on. Let's put it that way. The 2024 might be a big year for SMB AI adoption. And what kind of jumped out at me was, you and I have spent a long time in our recent career, say over the past decade, measuring or consuming data that is measuring small business adoption of SaaS tools to do everything from the accounting to scheduling the staff to whatever, all kinds of things that apps, essentially, the app economy and the small business adoption. And we've seen certain patterns that have been fairly consistent along the way. That, there's the early adopters. It's a minority of early adopters that come in quickly, kind of change their business based on this technology. And then there's the laggards that come along kind of reluctantly and slowly, and that there are certain, indicators of which group you're in, whether your business has been around a long time, got used to doing things a certain way, or you're a newer business that wants to use the latest tools and technologies to run your business. And what I'm wondering is if we're going to see a repeat of this pattern with AI and small business. My sense is we will see sort of a similar pattern. It's just going to happen a lot faster. That's kind of my gut, what my gut tells me. And I don't know, Mike, if you've looked at any of this stuff or if you have any hunches kind of about how the AI pattern versus the SaaS pattern will be similar or different, or if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So before getting into that, I do have thoughts on like that adoption pattern that we've seen sort of play out in many cycles over the past few decades. But first, sort of a definitional question. You may know the answer, or perhaps this is just rhetorical and we can figure it out from VCTA, but sort of how they define AI, because 30% to me seems high just as a pure smell test.
Honestly, to me, it did too as well, because I thought some people might say, oh, that seems low. And to me, that struck me as a high number.
And as a pure smell test with no actual data, that's the way it seems to me. But then that makes me think maybe it's not high, and it comes down to the definition of what they're considering AI. Like, if an SMB is using autocorrect on their iPhone, that's AI. That's technically
if
AI.
they understand it to be AI is an important question. Because
and in survey science, as you know, it's all about the question, the phrasing of the question. Yeah.
And it could be that and I don't know if they did this, so if you see to forgive me if I'm inferring too much here, but one thing you could do is create a list of, do you use autocorrect? Do you use this, that, and the other thing? And that we know as the surveyor or the survey conductor that these things are correlated with AI.
And then we can
on the back end. We can create a sort of a back, we could back into it that way. Yep. I don't know if that's what they did. I do not know.
Yeah. And
that's one thing that could have been done. My guess is they straight up asked, do you use any, I don't know if they said, do you use AI, or if do you use any of these things? And we know AI is basically, because for example, I've been using transcriber tools, through podcasts and interviews I do with people, et cetera, for a long time. It's been AI for a long time. So I've been using AI for a long time. I wasn't necessarily that aware it was AI until, relatively recently, but I've been using these things a long time. So I've been an AI user by that definition for years and years. Now
we all have. The list goes on.
Yeah, exactly.
The real answer is 100% if you broaden the definition to its extent. But it'll come down to the wording of the question and any gray area in terms of the recipient, the survey respondent, and how they translated that and gave their answer accordingly. But we can actually look further into that. But that
we can dig into that more. Yeah. These are numbers yanked out of press releases at this point, and so I can't speak for any of these parties in terms of
that's fine. We can put that technical issue aside. On to the larger question of the cycle. I mean, we've seen this movie before, and regardless of the technology, I think the particular technology defines the speed of the cycle, but the cycle itself and the patterns have been consistent every time, and I expect to see the same. And that pattern is essentially, I always like to say, SMBs will end up adopting by the carrot or the stick. The carrot is the early adopters that see an opportunity to operate.
Operate with fewer people, maybe, they may see the opportunity in several different ways.
Streamline efficiencies, etc. And then what happens is that cycle, they will start offering a consumer facing thing, or maybe it's a business facing thing, but they will either condition a user or customer expectation that then translates to all the other laggards essentially needing to rise up and meet that expectation just to sort of meet the table stakes, or it's a business facing thing and they're going to have to learn to run faster to keep up with those early adopters. So then I think the second wave, that's the stick. That's they adopt. They don't want to, but it's like they kind of have to.
The acceleration comes from the sense that you're missing out by not adopting.
Yep.
And or the thing we've seen in SaaS that we've always kind of assumed, and there's some data supporting it, and we don't have to get into all that, but the notion of the transition of the business being the trigger to kind of fully transform into a tech-enabled business, the transition of ownership, either through an exit
retirement.
to retirement and a probate kind of a situation, or
your son takes over, your daughter takes over,
or a sale, which is probably less common, but that's certainly one way. And that triggers, okay, let's get rid of all these boxes of paper and, appify this business, et cetera. I think that's going to play out in a similar fashion with AI. It's always been a little hard to measure that one exactly, that it's being driven. You kind of infer it because businesses are of a certain age, they're near retirement age, et cetera. But I think we'll see that kind of pattern where, early adopters come in quickly, they see benefits from it, we assume, and then that becomes kind of a standard operating procedure for the business you're competing against,
Yeah.
And that's the stick, as you said.
And another variable there, and though it's a tired topic, was COVID. And everyone talked about COVID digital transformation and we just have to learn how to operate remotely.
It was an accelerator. There's no question.
Right.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think people ignore is not just that the reasons for that acceleration being that businesses had to digitize, but because a lot of businesses actually treated COVID as sort of an early retirement. And then you saw that turnover, that generational turnover accelerated because of that.
Well, people are, of a certain age, they're maybe more vulnerable than, the world was just thrown into such a tizzy. Like maybe this is
I was going to retire in 2 years anyway. I was going to retire in 2 years
now
anyway.
Is good.
I'm going to do it now.
Is good. Yeah. So there's definitely that.
It pushed up a lot of that retirement. So in addition to the standard digital transformation accelerants, that separate accelerant of the SMB turnover, the generational turnover, was a factor.
Yeah, that could well be. Anyway, I thought this was interesting, and that I think we're going to start seeing a lot of these data points popping up where people are just saying, "Hey, using AI now," or whether they ask it directly like that, or like we just said a few minutes ago, kind of back into it by asking, "Are you doing these things?" Using these technologies, which I think honestly, I think it's kind of a better way to do that. What are you using? Because a lot of times, we talk all the time about these tools. And I think we've had this conversation before on the show where it's like, are these people being given a tool that is easy to use and makes things easier, or are they being told, here, use AI to do this,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, AI becomes, we're cool because it's AI and people are going to want to use it because of that, or are they going to be a little afraid of it, like it's going to be too tech forward for them? But and let's just give them an easy to use tool and forget about telling them it's AI, but they're using it either way.
Yeah.
How do you measure that? And how do you capture all of that? And that's going to require a little further investigation on our part and watching how all this data comes out and getting a little deeper into how the data is captured and gathered, what the methodologies are, And are they really measuring sort of engaged, conscious use of AI or sort of accidental use of passive use of AI? Anyway. Okay, Mike. Do you have a Who Won the Week for us?
Yeah, so Quora just raised $75 million from Andreessen Horowitz in sort of a tough funding environment. But more so, it's interesting what they're going to do with it. So they are building out, speaking of AI, basically a platform, an AI platform, not just an AI product or integration with Quora to better answer questions, which is a likely candidate for an AI integration. They're building a platform where they're trying to attract a number of creators to sort of build Quora-centric AI chatbots in a number of different interest areas or verticals, or so they're crowdsourcing that sort of app development. And I think this could translate to having sort of an app store or some sort of, Quora-centric repository or marketplace of ChatGPT based apps. So it's interesting they're going that route. Most of the 75 million they say is going to actually be used to sort of jumpstart that creator ecosystem by paying out creators, by incentivizing them with cold hard cash. So we'll be watching that.
That one's interesting. And Andreessen Horowitz, obviously, a very storied firm, but I remember writing last year about they backed Adam Neumann's prop tech business. And I'm wondering if, that I think was a little embarrassing for them. I think Mark Andreessen still stands behind that decision.
Well, they were also huge on crypto, and I think maybe still are, and that's been up and down. But
when we were talking last year briefly about decentralized social networks, which have become a little bit of a thing in the sort of post-X world, but what got me originally looking at that was the fact that Andreessen Horowitz was. And that's not directly crypto, but it's sort of blockchain.
Well, it's Web3 adjacent, and that's the link between the two.
Yeah. Anyway, mine. I'll be very quick with mine. I was joking before we got on that I was going to say Elon Musk's ketamine dealer, but I don't really think that person won anything if that person even exists. So I'm going to go with something that does sort of touch on Elon a little bit, which is. Again, another piece of data I just came across that there was a study done by an architecture firm, a big architecture firm that's just been written about, that basically found that, long story short, office workers say that the amount of time they spend in the office is insufficient to reach their sort of peak productivity. They actually think, if you really ask them when no one's looking, that they probably should spend a little bit more time in the office to be at peak productivity, which feeds right into the narrative that folks like Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk and others support, which is that we want people in the office working because we think they perform better there, all the collaboration, all the blah, 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 blah. I think it's about justifying their leases and their sort of desire for control. I have a different opinion on that, but there's a survey out now that kind of supports their point of view that more time in the office is better for the company, better for productivity. So I think this debate's going to continue raging on. I think we're going to continue to see contradictory points of view on, remote versus in office versus hybrid. A lot of people are tired of this, I know, but I thought it was just kind of interesting that some data is cropping up that it's going to give the Jamie Dimons of the world some fuel for their arguments.
Yeah, you're right. The debate will rage on. The other thing that will rage on is me working remotely as I have since 2003.
You and I are kind of in the same boat there. And we're both diehards, Yeah. And that's cool. I mean, I wouldn't live any other way at this point in my life.
Yep.
Okay, Mike, you want to read us out?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at localogy.com. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Your engagement helps others find us. And if you're interested in being a guest or sponsor, you can email us at podcast@localogy.com. So I'm Mike Bolin with Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. So thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Bolin and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.